Hello everyone and welcome back to Fake Tank Friday. Although it definitely would have been better to drop this video a couple weeks ago, I already had a video ready and I didn't have any advanced knowledge of the event, so it just wasn't possible. Regardless, with Warthunder's new Children of Arachis event, we have some fresh fake vehicles to discuss this week. This video will be especially useful for those of you who really enjoy the event and want to learn how to better defeat the tanks you will face. To start with, we will be looking at the starter vehicle called the CTT. Used by both sides of the conflict, this futuristic tank is equipped with a 140mm ATW rifled cannon and a 30mm SAW autocannon on the turret roof. Lastly, the tank features 12 66mm smoke grenade launchers to aid in temporary concealment. With its main armament, the vehicle is capable of launching its Hita Fest shell, which can defeat 1500mm of armor every 4 seconds. Although the tank weighs in at 60 tons, it is capable of an astounding 133 km per hour or 82 miles per hour. This is thanks to the massive 4,290 horsepower engine, which despite the look of the tank being similar to the Merkava, is mounted in the rear, not the front. These various systems are taken care of by the 5-man crew in the vehicle. Protection-wise, this tank is a pretty tough nut to crack, especially against chemical rounds. I won't go through the entire layout since that would take forever, but I'll put some footage showing the various armor values on screen while I talk about the main protection. According to the numbers I can find, this tank is protected frontally by 750mm of composite armor on the whole front and 800 on the turret. On the sides, we find 180mm of composite armor behind the tracks with additional 200mm skirts outside the tracks and 200 on the sides above the tracks. Behind that upper armor is the vehicle's fuel tanks, which act as further spaced armor for the fighting compartment. As for the turret sides, they have 400mm of protection with some sloping, and finally much thinner armor at 40mm on the rear. This is slightly thicker on the whole rear, but the max thickness is still only 75mm. The engine compartment will add to this a little, but the rear is obviously the weakest part of the tank. Additionally, the vehicle has smaller sections of explosive reactive armor, or ERA, mounted around the hull and turret. Several things about this tank's design are odd choices to me, considering it's meant to be a futuristic design. For one thing, why does it utilize a rifled cannon rather than a smoothbore? I suppose this could be due to the particular environment of the conflict we see, but this is contrary to what we see in real-world tank development. Most modern MBTs have by now moved from rifled guns to smoothbore thanks to improvements in fire control systems and other ballistic technologies. Challenger 2 was really the only example of a tank which still used rifling, and from what I've heard, that will be ending with Challenger 3's introduction. The other thing that I am curious about is the inclusion of both an autoloader as well as a crew member who is assigned as a loader. I guess this could keep the tank in action if the autoloader fails for some reason, but if I had to guess, this was just done to give the vehicle more survivability for balance reasons. Anyways, let's move on to the next vehicle. Once again, we come to a vehicle used by both sides in the form of the R-LAU. This support vehicle is built on the same chassis as the CTT, just with its turret changed to a pair of launchers filled with 30 203mm Cudgel 33A rockets. These can penetrate 1800mm of armor with a fire rate of 144 rounds per minute. Aside from slower traverse and a more limited vertical firing arc, it shares the stats of the standard MBT variant, albeit now with only 2 crew. Next up, we come to the last vehicle which both sides share, that being the QAD. Although not a tank, I figured I would include it here anyways since it is still a ground vehicle and I might as well mention it. This little machine is quite lightly armored, with its thickest plates being only 20mm, making its survivability the lowest of all the vehicles we'll be discussing. It does also feature a good covering of ERA, but given the thin armor it has, this does little to protect it. Although only 20 tons with 2,862 horsepower, this armored vehicle is actually slightly slower than the CTT and R-LAU at only 111 km per hour or 69 miles per hour, at least according to the stat card. For its armament, we find a pair of 40mm plasma autocannons which for some reason fire semi-armor piercing high explosive incendiary shells instead of plasma, and Red Spear guided anti-tank missiles. These allow for this speedster to take out targets far above its weight class from long range, making it a formidable opponent, but if it is spotted, it can easily be destroyed. Thankfully, it does have access to smoke launchers should it need to make a hasty exit. As with the R-LAU, this vehicle is crewed by 2. Unfortunately for the commander gunner, he has to sit facing backwards, which doesn't seem like a good time to me. Finally, we reach the truly interesting designs, starting with the specialty vehicle of the House of the Bull. The D0TR is easily the strongest tank you will encounter on the battlefield, with its enormous twin 180mm cannons which can be reloaded in only 10 seconds, although this has since been slowed to 13 seconds. These guns fire the same semi-armor piercing high explosive incendiary shells as the QAD, albeit far larger. These almost 71 kilogram shells carry an explosive payload of 20.2 kilograms. For comparison, the Soviet 180mm S-23 artillery gun had only around half that, with a projectile which weighed over 10 kilograms more. Translating that into imperial units means these shells each contain just under 45 pounds of explosive. Safe to say, you don't want to be hit by one of these, let alone 2. Protection on this tank is significantly better than the CTT, with 900mm of composite on the front of the hull and 700mm on the turret front and lower plate. With the turret being unmanned as well, this means the crew are safer within the hull. On the sides, the tank has 300mm with extra 300mm fenders around the tracks. The rear is once again thinly armored with 50mm on the turret rear and between 75 and 100 on the hull. That being said, the engine, transmission, fuel tank, and even the armored ammo racks add to this protection for the crew unless the penetrating round detonates the shells. Propelling this 124-ton behemoth is a nuclear reactor generating 5,718 horsepower, allowing the tank a top speed of 97 km per hour. Be warned though, attempting to reach that speed is a great way to give the sandworms an absolute hard-on for your vehicle, so slow and steady is definitely the way to go. This is without mentioning the reactor's tendency to detonate following the destruction of the vehicle. Once again, we find a crew of 2 in this tank, meaning that thankfully for loaders everywhere, this beast is fitted with an autoloader. Like the others, this tank has a set of smoke grenade launchers if the need arises for them. Last but not least, we come to what is probably the most unique design of the bunch, that being the House of Hawks S0NC. Unlike all the other conventionally armed vehicles, this tank features a 1000mm acoustic M7 cannon which fires sonic waves. These powerful blasts completely eliminate the protection provided by any armor targeting the crew within. Despite their destructive capabilities, these blasts are limited in effective range, meaning this vehicle is only capable of causing damage within about a kilometer. This tank shares a chassis with the D0TR, however, without the 2 cannons, its weight is less at 114 tons. With the chassis being shared, this gives the S0NC the same mobility as the D0TR, which is a little strange given the 10-ton weight difference. Armor-wise, the hull is the same as its cousin, aside from the different armor scheme of the turret. With this being unmanned as well though, this makes very little difference. Keep in mind, all these figures are based on the stats I was able to get mainly from the stat cards the devs gave them, and Gaijin has a history of having some of those numbers being wrong. As these are all completely fake vehicles though, it's not as important for us to have exact details for them. Overall, I find these vehicles interesting and unique, with the models looking quite nice. As I mentioned earlier, with them supposedly being tanks from the future, it does raise a few questions in my mind about certain aspects which they have and others they don't, such as active protection systems or some sort of shielding. However, in the end, these are just tanks made for an April Fool's event, so I won't be too hard on them. It definitely does make you wonder what sort of vehicles might be created in the future, whether it be in our lifetimes or beyond, but that is far beyond the scope of this video. Perhaps we can revisit that topic in a future video. If you enjoyed this video, I recommend following it with my video on the fake tanks of warthunder, especially if you are a regular player of the game, or if you want some more gameplay from the event, you can check out my new video on my other channel, ConeOfArc, where I post gaming content occasionally. Thanks as always to my channel members for supporting this content, and I will see all of you next week for another video.